Thanks for being here, late afternoon, post-lunch, first day. My name is Joanna Matson-Tandberg, and I'm an Ayurveda practitioner, and a yoga instructor, and a cannabis consultant, and a few other little energy work pastimes that I have on top of that. And I'm here to just kind of tell a story. You know, I went round and round. I had a PowerPoint to share, and I just decided, you know, you guys have been probably watching a lot of PowerPoints and looking at data and analyzing information. And so instead, I'd like to just kind of tell a story of how I became involved in this industry. And it's not because it's about me, but it's because I feel like what I have learned has really changed my life. And I think most people that are here have some story. We all have a story. Every single one of us has a story. But my story involves other people, and it involves mostly my family members, and then some friends and a few neighbors, and then clients, and then next thing you know, I'm CEO of a company. So I wanted to just kind of back up a little bit and explain the power that I have found from the cannabis plant. And it goes back a few decades. And I was trying to figure out, like, where do I start today? I was like, what do I want to say first? But I think what keeps coming to mind, so I'm going to go with the imagery, is I was 15 years old, and I was living in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and I was a transplant, and I was hating my parents because I didn't want to live in the South, and I didn't enjoy my schooling, and I was just one of those pretty much unhappy 15-year-olds. And a friend of mine had just, and we have all kinds of fun energy with the lights today, and a friend of mine introduced me to my first rolled joint. And it was, oh my God, it was from California. She had just gotten back from spring break. And we were going to be rebels, and we're going to sneak out and sit in the cul-de-sac and smoke this big doobie. And I was raised, quick background, I was raised in a very strict military Catholic Southern family. So this is a bit verboten. You can drink scotch all day long, but you probably shouldn't smoke pot. So I did this once, and it really didn't do anything, but it was the rebellious part of it. It was super exciting, and we did this. This was super fun. And that was kind of that. It was a story, and it was a fun story. And then a couple years later, I started getting sick, and little things like infections that turned into bronchitis, or bronchitis that turned into strep throat, or strep throat that turned into tonsil, whatever, constantly on antibiotics, and missing school, and eventually had a tonsillectomy at the age of 17. And that was kind of a bad start into my college years. And within about a year of college, I started experiencing some really intense gastrointestinal pain and problems and weakness, and I became emaciated, I was losing weight, and it became this compounded problem, which now looking back all these years later, I could have probably stopped things in their track if I understood the microbiome of the belly and how it affects our brain and all these things that were happening to me, but I had no clue. I was 19 years old living in a dorm, in college. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And I was luckily diagnosed quite quickly because my father already had this disease. It wasn't a new thing for me. It was something that we had been living with in my home for the last about 10 years maybe. And so to me, it was devastating because I knew what I had seen my dad go through, and I was much sicker than my dad, apparently. I had a much more severe case of this disease. So I had to move home, and I immediately was put on immunosuppressant drugs. The first batch almost killed me. I was apparently allergic to sulfa, and I didn't know that. I was on high doses of prednisone. If anyone here has ever dealt with prednisone, it's really great in an emergency. It's not so good when you've been on it chronically for what ended up for me being over a decade. I got sicker over time, and I won't go through the whole long story, but by the time I was in my late 20s, I got married, I had my first child, and I had been through a very long, rigorous amount of immune suppressant drugs and anti-inflammatory medications. And I was fine, I was functioning. I had learned just to deal with pain. I had learned that if I eat, I don't feel good. But if I have a little bit of marijuana on the side and nobody knows about it, I actually can eat a little more, and I have less nausea, and I don't feel as sick. But I also had anxiety and shame because I was doing something against the law, and I was doing something in an area of the country which, I guess every part of the country has their own, swag. But I was doing this in a part of the country that has a very strong Bible Belt side of it. And so there was like the underground story and the rebellious ones, and then those of us that were trying to stay above and do everything by the book. Well, when I was 19 and diagnosed with Crohn's disease, my first question to the doctors was, why are you putting me on medications that are going to destroy or suppress my immune system? Isn't that going to make it hard for me to live and hard for me to have an ability to fight other infections? And they said, yeah, you don't need to worry about that. This is just what we do. This is the rest of your life. And here's all the food you don't eat anymore. And so all of this information just got thrown at me at a young age, but I incorporated it into my life. You know, I went on to college or finished college, and I went on to doing some post-school and got a job and a career and a husband and had a baby. But all the while kind of doing this all the time. Just always had my hand around my belly. My shoulders kind of always stooped down a little bit, and I really struggled with eating. I didn't have an eating disorder, but I had a mental issue with food because I was always afraid of what would happen once I ate the food. And rarely did I have a normal day where I didn't feel sick, and rarely did I have things move through my system the way they're supposed to. So I was also dealing with side effects. You know, side effects of these medications are burly, but if you're in the allopathic world, there's another solution. You just take another pill. And then when that pill has a side effect, guess what? We have another pill. And so I was on that same story that probably everybody in this room has either dealt with or has experienced with somebody they know or love. It's kind of now part of our culture. But then I got pregnant with my second child. Well, right before I got pregnant with my second child, my health had taken a really strong tailspin down after my baby was born, my daughter. And there was a new drug. It was a chemotherapy drug that they were going to try on certain Crohn's patients in the United States. And I was the lucky one to be the first one to try it. First one in a week of time, a whole group of us. And I felt like a lab rat. It was terrifying, laying in this hospital bed, being hooked up to IV and saying, well, this works. You're going to have quality of life again. And I'm thinking, but I'm reading through the side effects and I'm looking at all the, what's in it. And this just, again, I'm not a doctor, but this seems a little counterintuitive to what I'm dealing with. But I took the drug anyways. And with the pressure of my parents, my husband at the time, all the people that loved me were like, just do what the doctors say. I'm like, well, but it's not your body, it's my body. So that was kind of my first aha moment of really going against my gut instinct, but at the same time, desperate to get well. So then I unexpectedly got pregnant with my second child, my son, my sweet boy, and my health just declined even more. And unfortunately, because I had just taken this new medication, we weren't sure how it would affect a pregnant woman. That hadn't ever been thought about, nor had I thought I was having a second child. That was just a little side thing with, you go out one night and you're finally feeling better, drink a little bourbon for Kentucky Derby, and next thing you know, you're pregnant. And 9 months later, I have a kiddo who is born sick. And I believe 100% that his issues when he was born were because of what was already in my system and what was crossing over into his little body. And so he was born with severe asthma. He was born with awful eczema. It was just like his whole body was on fire, and allergic to pretty much every food that most babies and children eat after they are weaned. But unfortunately, he was weaned very young because my nutrition level, my body was not assimilating nutrition, plus I had the medication. So breast milk barely came through. So he had to unfortunately end up on formula, which increased his allergies. So now I have a sick child, and that changes the whole ballgame, because it's one thing to not feel good yourself, but when you see a brand new baby or a 6-month-old or now a year-old, or as he progressed, he didn't get better. He only got worse. And everything that the medical community could offer me caused him more pain, more inflammation, more tears, and it was always coming from the mom, right? So I'm putting something on his skin that the doctor recommends. It burns, he screams, mom's hurting me. So we went through an entire mental and emotional crisis of my child and my toddler watching all of this. So it was really probably, I would say, the top 3 most painful things I've ever been through was trying to help my baby. And as he grew up, I decided this is going to change. We're changing everything in this in our family unit. We are no longer following in this way of treating illnesses. And but the bigger story was I had to have part of my colon now removed and small intestine because I had just gotten too sick, and I couldn't pick up my children, and I couldn't drink water, I couldn't swallow food, I couldn't function, and I couldn't fight the system anymore. And so I threw my hands up and said, cut it out, let's just start over, and then I'm done with Western medicine. I am finished. I am going out on my own. I'm going to be a rebel and do it my way. All the time, I'm still secretly on the side, using a little bit of marijuana here and there, because we weren't really referring to it as cannabis back in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000 yet, at least not back east, and still dealing with the anxiety of the fact that I'm breaking the law and I'm doing something that's wrong. But then I would always say, but it's a plant. Like, why is this wrong? This is weird. This just doesn't intuitively make sense. And meanwhile, my son is now growing up and having problems in every aspect of his life because he was so uncomfortable. You know, everything that touched his skin when he went to school, the food, the lights, all of it just became a constant pressure to how do I get my kiddo well. And so after I started healing myself, post-surgery, decided to no longer follow Western medicine. I'd been on chemotherapy collectively for 5 years now. And it was, you know, I didn't look sick really. You know, people would say, oh, you don't look that sick. I'm like, oh, if you could see me from the inside out, I'm so toxic. And so I put on a good game face. And, but now that wasn't as important as my boy. And he then at the same time was, you know, becoming more of his own little person, you know, and I don't want you to put that on me, Mom, and I don't want to eat that food. So then what do you do when you're trying to balance another human being with his own ability to speak and be well on my own and treat us all in a holistic way? So I found and I was a yoga teacher, and I started learning about Ayurvedic medicine. So Ayurveda is one of the oldest, if not the oldest form of medicine science in the world. It's based out of India. It predates the written word. The first language that was ever spoken or even written with the different lineages and the different teachings of Ayurveda was done in Sanskrit. And over thousands of years, it was practiced. There upwards between 5,000 and 10,000 years. We don't really exactly know because much of the literature has been lost. When Ayurveda was the main medicine of India, it was a very strong practice. It was both herbs, it was medicine, it was food, it was routine, it was your garden, it was how you presented yourself to your community. It was every aspect of your life, and it just blew my mind. And I was like, this is what I want to learn about. And what had happened was post-surgery, I got sick again, and I was terrified of getting back into that like rat race of these issues with medicine that were affecting me. So I went to an Ayurvedic practitioner in San Diego that was recommended. And he gave me a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and my symptoms went away. And like I actually felt good. And I thought, well, what was that all about? So I took my son to him. He did the same thing. He put together these things, gave them some herbs. My son actually felt better. So that took me down a whole new path where I went back to school and became an Ayurveda practitioner. And all this time, I'm learning a little bit more. I'm starting to call marijuana cannabis because now I'm on the West Coast. It's a little different out in California and Oregon and Washington. And I'm starting to understand more about the plant. And what piqued my interest the most and what really threw me into this is when California went legal with their medical program, one of the diseases listed was Crohn's disease. And I remember specifically saying to whoever was sitting next to me, it's like, I smoked a lot in my day trying to help my disease. It did not cure me. So whatever works, I agree with legalization, but I'm not really understanding what they're talking about because I didn't know. And I didn't know that you could make it into an oil and you could do all these different things with this plant. So with my son now having his issues and me having my issues, but now we had Ayurveda like helping us, I knew we still needed something else. And I wasn't quite sold yet on making these oils and tinctures. And I didn't know the history. I didn't know the prohibition lies. I didn't know that this was a plant that we had used forever all over the world, including in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine, which were my two favorite. I didn't know any of that. I mean, most of us didn't unless we were raised that way or really in a community that encouraged us to know this because we were going against the propaganda machine. And then my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic melanoma. And right before that happened, a good friend of mine said to me, you know what's going to happen to you? Somebody in your family is going to get diagnosed with cancer, and they're going to be close to death, and you're going to save them by learning about cannabis. And I looked at her and I said, well, I sure as hell hope that doesn't happen. And thanks for the foreshadowing woo-woo, but I don't think so. And like 3 months later, my brother-in-law and my father were both diagnosed with advanced cancers. So that made me listen to my friend a little more. I'm like, God, how did she know that? And at the same time, it dove me in deeper to understanding the plant. And how does it work? And why does it work? And why don't we know this? And why has it been hidden? I mean, the questions it's a rabbit hole. I mean, if any of you, I'm sure most of you here, have jumped online and started reading, the O'Shaughnessy reports, understanding that in the 1800s, there was doctors treating epileptic babies with CBD. They didn't know at the time it was called CBD, but they were using oil of a plant. I learned that and it blew my mind. I had a dog with epilepsy. I could have saved her, and then you learn about the next thing, and then you learn about cannabis back during this, or Nixon during the 70s, and how he understood that this was helping with cancer, yet we lost the evidence. Why did that happen? Now I was furious. And I have a lot of fire in me, and that fire pretty much took off, because what I wanted to know is if somebody I love has cancer and I know there's a cure out there, or at least something that maybe isn't curing but is helping them, why is it so hard to learn, and why can't I get my hands on it, or how do I get my hands on it? And so I sat my father down, and my father is a retired Army colonel and a former federal prosecutor and a Southern man, and very strong in his Christian belief, and a newly found Catholic. So I had a little bit going against me on this one. And however, his oncologist at Emory University had no answers for him. He said, you have these tumors in your lungs, you have them in your stomach, you have them in your lymph node, you have them in your adrenal and possibly your liver, you have high blood pressure, you have acid reflux, you have Crohn's disease, you have chronic diarrhea. I think you need to get your affairs in order. And nobody is ready for that. No one's ever ready to hear that. And so I looked at, and this came first from a pulmonologist who I think it was one of her first days on the job out of her residency. It was one of the worst experiences. I didn't know who I felt worse for at the time, my family or the poor doctor delivering the news to my dad. And so by the end of that day, I had, with the pulmonologist before the oncologist, I was on the phone. I was calling friends on the West Coast, because I lived here in Oregon, and saying, I think what I need is a lot of cannabis oil. So if you could get a pound of the best weed you have, and I send you a video, could you make me some oil? And I had a friend that said yes. It didn't take long to find somebody that was really willing to put their whole world on hold for me, which was amazing in itself, and do something highly illegal and help out a friend for his family member that he's never even met. And so, it became the next pathway or journey of my life. I had no idea that I would be standing up in front of talking about this. And my dad still would be pretty mad if he knew I was. So if anyone's recording this, do not send it to my parents. It wouldn't make him very happy. He still won't tell anyone. He's very quiet about it. So basically, I sat my dad down after I received this oil, and I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do an Ayurveda protocol, which means we're going to support every system in your body, because I believe in holistic medicine. I believe that we have to support every system, the circulatory, the respiratory, the gastrointestinal, your eliminations, your adrenals, your everything needs to be strong. Most importantly, your liver, because your liver is going to process everything that we're about to do. And we're trying to get rid of something in your body, and we need to make sure all of the organs supporting that can help you with this process. And he's like, okay. And I said, and the way we're going to do this is with a few different herbs and a few other different essential oils, and we're going to use cannabis oil. And there was that pause where he's like, pot? Yes, Dad, you can call it that, but it's going to be a little different. We're going to put it in an oil form for you, and we're going to learn this together, because I really have no idea what I'm doing. And I was absolutely terrified. My brother thought I'd lost my mind, but he was also secretly really excited. My mom was numb, so it didn't matter. And the extraneous family members were all calling me, telling me I'd lost my mind, and that your dad has cancer, he's going to die, deal with it. There's nothing you can do to help him. And I was like, you know what? That just makes me more emboldened. You watch me. And which made me more terrified too. And so we started him on, kind of the Rick Simpson protocol. And I was literally following the books and following the protocol online. I was researching till 4 a.m. I did nothing but learn about cannabis for 6 straight months. It ended in a divorce at the end, so not because of that, but it was like to the point where he was like, you're more into this than you are me. I'm like, I think I am, because this is changing the world. I need to do something with this. And through this all, my dad was a really great sport. And, the first week, He was high as a kite because I didn't quite get that little rice size thing right. You know, I've learned not to do it that way now. But, you know, on Father's Day, my mom made the best dinner you've ever seen, and my dad slept with like drool coming out of his mouth through the whole thing with his blood pressure low, and my brother screaming at me, "What have you done? You've killed our dad." I'm like, I don't think he can die from this. I'm pretty sure. So, I mean, it was really, I had no idea what I was doing. But I did have online resources. You know, I was following Patients Out of Time and Project CBD and the O'Shaughnessy report and all different, everything I could get my hands on. I was just reading. And then figuring it out as I went along. And then I decided to take a course. That would probably be the best way to get through this and really understand. But I didn't have time for that when my dad was first diagnosed. Well, the first set of scans he got back, his tumors were all shrinking. And I can't even tell you how I felt that day. I was out on a hike at Catherine Creek in the Gorge, because I live out in the Gorge, and I knew all day long that he was at Emory University, and I knew what time his appointment was, and the phone didn't ring for 8 hours. And I was like, has anybody heard from my parents? And so I'm assuming the worst. And then they call and they say, "Oh, we forgot to call and tell you. Everything's great." I'm like, how do you forget to call and tell me that? Do you have any idea what impact this has on me? But they were so elated that, you know, they would have called me immediately with the bad news. But they didn't really think to call me with the good news, which I have now forgiven them. But at the time, I realized how intense I felt inside my body. And then because I trusted, but I didn't really know if I could trust. Was I trusting something just because I love my dad, or was I trusting something because I believed in the science? And that's really hard when you're that close into it, I have now learned. Next set of scans, well, I'll back up a little bit. So then my dad was convinced by his oncologist that even though whatever you're doing seems to be working, we're not going to acknowledge this because we don't practice this. We have no training in this, and this, we really don't like that you're taking frankincense either. True story. And I looked at the oncologist. I'm like, what's the matter with frankincense? It's been used since the beginning of time. He's like, well, we just don't have data. I'm like, okay, you don't have data on anything we're doing, but his tumors have shrunk, and now you want to put him on a new test drug. So the oncologist convinced my parents that even though he was doing better, we should try him on a new drug that was still in its infancy stages, and it was in a test group. And however, the side effect, number one side effect from this targeted immunology treatment was that it could perforate your colon, it could create IBS, Crohn's, or you could bleed out. And I was like, well, hello, he's had Crohn's disease for 35 years. For the first time in 35 years, his symptoms have gone away. He's off medication. Don't we think this is a bad idea to introduce a drug that might actually create this whole problem again? But I'm not a doctor, and I've never claimed to be a doctor, and I had no pull in this conversation. So my dad went in, he decided to listen to the doctors at Emory, and they hooked him up and gave him a treatment. He felt fine. They wanted to do 30 of them. And so after the third one, he ended up in the ER bleeding through his rectum with perforation in his colon, and it was terrible. So what saved him was Ayurvedic herbs. I actually had Ayurvedic herbs from my doctor in the Bay Area, sent them to my father overnight. We stopped the bleeding, got him out of the hospital, and I'm like, Dad, now will you listen to me? Now will you admit that plant medicine is actually helping you? And he's like, well, I think you might have something, you might know what you're talking about here. Thanks, Dad. So we got him back on the well, he never stopped the RSO, actually, but now we got him to the gram a day. And I don't know if any of you have ever done that or have ever been with someone that has gone through the Rick Simpson protocol, but a gram a day is an enormous amount of high THC oil. And you don't just jump in. It took us about, I think 6 weeks to get to that place. So that's how slow. I mean, low and slow. We're not kidding around when low and slow. We started on little baby doses. And then we planned. We literally wrote on the calendar, you have 2 weeks, Dad, where you're going to go into what we call Sleeping Beauty stage. And when Sleeping Beauty, I just made that up, but Sleeping Beauty stage in my story, from what I've read, from the anecdotal evidence, is that you're going to sleep a lot. And that's good because your body's going to heal. If you're sleeping, that's the best time to heal. And you know, he was a trial attorney after he was a prosecutor. He worked 60, 80-hour weeks plus weekends, plus military in the weekend. My dad was very behind on a lifetime of not sleeping enough. And so he's like, hell, I'd love to sleep all day long. That sounds amazing. And so I prepared my mom, who's a chronic worrier about everything on the planet. And I said, Mom, when he starts sleeping, this is a good thing. So please don't panic. Please don't panic. Okay, no, we have it on the calendar. We know when we're going to get, you know, I was guessing. I didn't know for sure this was going to happen, but it did. As soon as we got to like a certain dose, my dad just slept 18 hours a day. He'd wake up and have a little food and go back to sleep. Wake up, have a little food, go back to sleep. Mom would massage all the oil on him. I had been making tinctures and topicals, rubbing down his spine and in his groin and on his head and all the different skin cancers on his head everywhere. We're always doing the under the tongue, but at this point, we were kind of bathing him in it. And he thought that was cool because Mom got to put her hands all over him, and they've been married 50 years. It's probably been a while. So he was like, this is great. Your mom's putting oil on me every day, and this is fun. And he felt better. I mean, he just felt good. And then he fell asleep for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, my mom panicked. And so she called the oncologist. My husband's been sleeping. She leaves out the part that he's taking a gram of RSO every day. And so they say, well, prepare yourself. He's probably dying. This is probably the end. You should call your family. And I'm like, did you tell them that he's like stoned out of his mind and that's why he's sleeping? But she wouldn't tell him because she just can't talk about it. You talk about those things. And so I flew back home, and he was fine. He was actually better than I'd ever seen him before. He'd lost all this weight. He'd had like new skin growing from all of the skin graft he'd had from the topical cancer. And he was eating. He had well-formed bowels for the first time in 35 years. So he was actually the healthiest he'd ever been, and he was on no medication. He wasn't on high blood pressure medicine. He wasn't on his Crohn's medicine. He no longer had acid reflux. He no longer had chronic diarrhea. I mean, it was unbelievable. I didn't believe it for myself. I'm like, nobody's going to believe this, but this is true. Going back to Emory, had another scan. His tumors are smaller again. They're like, well, what are you doing again? He's like, well, I put frankincense on my head and on my tongue, and I put cannabis up my butt in a capsule, and I put it under my tongue, and I put this other stuff. And the doctor's like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I guess keep doing it. And so we did. We kept going. And, CBD timed, we did like strong CBD tinctures and waited a couple of hours, and the cannabis, and then the CBD, and then the other things we were doing, and green juice that he still to this day hates and acts like he's 4 years old every time he drinks it. But we had him on a protocol. And I'm very happy to report that his last set, this is 4.5 years ago, his last set of scans, the head oncologist of melanoma at Emory University said, I think it's time that Emory studies cannabis as medicine and yoga. He calls Ayurveda yoga, which is fine. They're related. And because that's what worked. And now, can I say it cured my dad? No. Is he cured of cancer? I have no idea. We aren't biopsying. We're not, having different samples drawn out of his body. But right now, they've never seen anything like it. And so that, as this was all happening, going back to 2015, I realized that maybe there is something here that we need to be talking about. And I envisioned myself like talking about this publicly. I was not at the time a public speaker. I was I taught yoga retreats, and I got up and talked about wellness and helped people do some breathing exercises and things like that. But to get up and actually talk about something that was still so verboten, still so controversial, seemed like the most terrifying aspect of anything I would ever do. But I also, at the same time, watched my brother-in-law, who had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and was 20 years younger than my dad, or maybe 15 years younger than my dad, die within 4 months. And he only did the allopathic test drug. And the week that he went into hospice was the week he had decided to switch over to Ayurveda and cannabis. And he didn't even make it out of the hospital. So that changed my life. He was a dear friend of mine. And I just watched, a brother-in-law die and a father make it. And they both were supposed to be gone in a few months. And so one did, one didn't. And to me, I'm not a scientist, really, but it looked like enough to follow. Like, I need to pay attention to this. And I was heartbroken too. So then I decided to start talking about it and learn more about it and find the right products. I mean, I was literally doing like weird things with, earphones. Hi, I'm looking for a pound of cannabis. It has to be indica and really high THC. Can you make it into an oil? And I had teenage kids and like, Mom, we had no idea that you knew about this stuff. I was like, well, when you're at school, I have a whole different life. So it was kind of like a Weeds episode. It was very strange. And so now here we are. My kids are official adults, thank God. And they watched this whole thing go down. And during this time, my son was in a ski accident. So now my son's healthy. My son was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Everybody in my family. I think it's the type A stress military background that's in our genes. But when my son was diagnosed, he was about, I think, 14. And it was an early diagnosis. It was from our general pediatric doctor in town. And she knew me well enough to know that I was not going to follow her recommendations. She's like, well, here's the diagnosis. Take him to OHSU. Get an actual diagnosis. They're going to put him on a treatment plan. I was like, okay, thanks, bye. Took it to the school, got the medical plan. My son can come home for lunch. My son can be late, and I treat my son with whatever he needs. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But I never went to OHSU Because had I gone to OHSU, they would have put him on the exact same regimen of drugs that I was on. And had I denied it, I would have probably been arrested because he was a minor. So instead, we got him on Ayurvedic herbs, because now he listened to me. He's like, all right, Mom, what do I have to do? Because he was going through puberty. He's kind of a pain he's a brat, right? You know, kids aren't fun at 14. But now he had a health issue, and he'd always had a health issue. So it was like one more thing. First, it was his skin and his lungs, and now it's his stomach and his intestines. And I said, let's try CBD. Well, actually, let's try full spectrum. We did like the full THC and CBD tinctures. And I said, let's try this, but don't you tell anybody, because I could go to jail. And along with food choices, of course, and along with Ayurvedic herbs, and along with making sure you go to bed at this time and turn that damn phone off, and all the other things that you have to do. You can't just give somebody a tincture, in my opinion, and not also look at every other level of what they're doing in their life, because there's many things that we can undo without the use of cannabis. Cannabis just encourages the betterment of every herb we're using. It's the synergizer. It creates an entourage effect, not just within itself, but with the other herbs and other plants. So I was making his formulas. I was doing things that helped with, cramping and colicking or whatever his issues were, because that's what I've been doing with my dad. That's what I've been doing for my clients without cannabis for years, just making tinctures according to Ayurveda. Upper respiratory, you have a cold. Oh, I'll mix you something. Neighbors would come down and send their kid, hey, I've got the flu. Can you help me? So I was very much just like the backyard little witch doctor, just doing things like that. But now it was on another level. And now it was my kid, again, who was sick, and then my dad's dealing with his stuff. And I still have to watch myself. I was able to completely get off all medication in 2004, and I've never been on it again. But in the middle of this, I was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism, and it went as far as Graves' disease. And I almost died from a potential stroke. So it was like everything was hitting us all at once. And I was like, I got an idea. I'll try CBD. So this is how I learned. I was taking classes, reading books, going to now medical conferences, but I was also unfortunately thrown into it with every person in my family for the most part. My daughter had a traumatic brain injury and almost died when she was little, and now she was having repercussions after getting bird flu and mono when she was going through puberty. And so by the time she became 15, she had all kinds of head issues, hearing issues, tinnitus. It felt like her head was exploding, and it created emotional and mental severe trauma. So what do you do with that? Do I start prescribing medication or getting her on medications to really probably not fix the problem? Or can we try again to look at the whole problem, the whole body, look at every level? And by the time she was 18, she was not only feeling wonderful, she became a certified yoga instructor. And now she's studying herbalism as a 21-year-old, because she's like, Mom, this really works. Like, this really changed my life. And she watched it change her brother's life. He broke his back. He was hit by another snowboarder who happened to be living with us at the time, and he had his back fractured in 3 places. He was brought home after 3 days in the hospital and not sure if he would ever walk again. And I was out of the country when this happened, so I flew in immediately, and he was brought home on, Oxycontin and Tylenol accelerated. I don't know what, the heavy stuff with all the extra stuff in it. A lot of meds. What he needed. He was in horrific pain. However, after about 4 days, I watched my 17-year-old, who is as sweet as they come, and I'm not just saying that because he's my kid, he really is, become a monster in front of my eyes. I'd read about it, I'd seen it in the movies. I had never actually seen somebody become so quickly dependent on a pain medicine to where he would scream at me when I walked in the door, "Where's my pill?" I'm like, you have 4 more hours, dude. And again, I hadn't started studying the background of Oxycontin. I didn't know the lies perpetrated by even that industry, that they knew all along it's not an 8-hour pain medication, which is possibly and partially why we have such an addiction problem, because people think it's doing something, it's not doing that, they take more, next thing you know, their whole receptors are off key. So I said, we're going to immediately switch you to THC-rich cannabis oil. Again, controversial, could probably put me in jail. However, I didn't want an addicted son who's had health issues for 17 years. And this was the first year of his life he'd felt good enough to get up and go skiing on a mountain. And he got just bombed from the back. So we had him start just like my dad, a little sesame seed amount under his tongue. I think he had a little bit of tolerance already. I have a pretty good idea. He was 17 in Oregon, Washington. But he, within about 6 to 10 days, we were completely off Oxycontin, completely off the Tylenol, and managing his pain completely with CBD and THC in different levels at different parts of the day. again, very quietly, you can't tell anybody this. You don't tell anybody, Jake. He's like, I know, Mom. Now I'm seasoned on this. But, I had to get through like a few months of till he was 18. And then it's like, now you can tell whoever you want and help us change the world. And he still has his issues. None of us are all suddenly like these perfect humans with no problems, but we all found profound healing in a plant that should be legal should be decriminalized in every part of this world. And we also really began to understand and respect the power of alternative supplemental, natural, original medicine. I don't like to use the word alternative, but that's kind of the nomenclature of Ayurveda. And so I started counseling other people. I immediately had my first official, I'd always been counseling, but I had been doing it as an Ayurveda practitioner and a yoga therapist. I didn't ever say the word cannabis. I never talked about it. I was closet. But now I came out, and my first client was 83 years old, and she was a retired nurse with breast cancer. And she said, I'm not doing allopathic. I'm not biopsying it. I know enough. And so we started her on the same exact protocol as my dad, and she's still to this day and that was 4 years ago, one of my favorite clients. We're helping her with skin cancer right now. And I'm not I'm not a cancer specialist. I'm not an expert. I don't think at really anything, but just trying to understand life. But I do believe that we have the duty to share with every single person we can talk to this opportunity of healing, because our body has an ability to heal. And Ayurveda teaches that, and it always has. Self-healing is the basis of humanity. Every one of us has the instinct to know what to do. Most of us don't do it because it's conditioned out of us. And cannabis has not just the physical or the physiological remedy that we need. It also has a spiritual and a mental and an emotional effect on our bodies. And it does open us up to being more open-minded to the possibilities. When people say, well, I want to try it, but I don't want to feel it. It's like, well, what are you afraid to feel? Is it that you're afraid to feel? Or is it that it really makes you not feel good? Because we need to find where you can feel, but also feel good at the same time, and hopefully not create a story about that feeling, if that makes sense. So sometimes we put stories behind our feelings, and it may not be accurate. And then that story then takes us down a whole nother path and another journey that's incorrect because we were following a conditioning or a judgment that we grew up with. So I try to teach people how to undo all of that. And I started a business called CannAveda, and about 5 years ago, combining Ayurveda and yoga and cannabis, and then teaching. I do retreats down in in the States and in Mexico and Costa Rica, different places when I can. And I have a practice in White Salmon, Washington, in the Gorge. And then about a year ago, so my biggest challenge was finding the right products for people. And I decided to start my own company, my own product company, because I wanted to be able to present. Most of my clients are over 60 or 65 years old. They don't want to go to a dispensary. They may live alone. I don't want to put them on something with or recommend something with a lot of THC that they fall down in the middle of the night. There's so many things to think about. And so I felt like the safest way was to focus on a full spectrum, organic, hemp-based oil that I can infuse with Ayurvedic oils and teach people how to use them topically and sublingually and of that matter. So ZVEDA was born from that, which is not why I'm up here to talk about, but I do have some products that are blended together. And so really the purpose of me being here today, I feel, is I just want people to feel empowered and to know that, it's great that this industry is growing and it's all over the world, and there's conferences in every city now, and we can sometimes lose sight of why we're all here. A lot of us are making great money in this industry. A lot of us are have our own stories that changed our life or someone else's. And a lot of us have no idea. We're just curious because it's a natural curiosity, because we have now learned that this plant has evolved with us since the beginning of humanity. So we best learn about it and understand how to use it and be able to help others, especially those that are older than us, that they're not in a place to learn all this on their own for the most part. Just navigating the internet for me is still a challenge at times. I can't imagine how my mom does it. She gets really frustrated easily. So I just say, hey, Mom, I'll help you out here. Or like my 83-year-old client, she's like, internet? I don't use the internet. I don't even have a cell phone. So, how are those people going to learn? And how do we help spread the word to undo the programming that got us into the situation in the first place? We all were lied to. Going back 4 generations, we've all been lied to. And so until we speak up and speak out and start making these changes and being honest and with integrity of the products that we're making or selling or using or promoting or whatever it is, we have to do that in order to like turn this place around. I mean, our world is a bit upside down and a little bit dystopian right now. And we have this plant that can fix the soil. It can make anything plastic can make, or paper or fiber, and it can heal our bodies in an amazingly, easily intuitive way. And I just feel like there's so much respect I have for this plant, and as a medicine, and as everything else that it does, because I feel like it truly can heal the world, and it can heal so much of humanity. And I just wanted to share that story, and thanks for being here. And I don't know what time it is, but and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yes? Microphone would be great.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing that story.
You're welcome.
My name is Deb. I'm from Living Earth Hemp in Eugene.
Hey, Deb.
How do you navigate, I don't want to say making claims about CBD, but we have a website. We want to put out the information that is there.
Yes.
But we have one team member who is just like, no, you cannot put anything on your site that makes any, and it's not medical claims, but it's known experiences. And I'm also a stage 3 cancer survivor, so I know how beneficial it is. So how do you navigate that? That's my question.
That is my probably number one frustration, because we have these truths, we have these things that we know, but yet we have these guidelines that we can't share. You know, drug companies can make claims all day long and people can die. We can take something that will not kill you and make a claim and get sued, or lose our ability to have a bank account. So the way I've been navigating it is trying to talk as much as I can. With my products, there's very little. I talk a lot about Ayurveda. I talk about the importance of how to grow the plant, how to extract the oil, what to look for in a plant. I try not to make it specific about my product. I don't say some of the things I want to say, but what I do put on my website, and I encourage anyone making a product that's for healing purposes to do this, is I give a whole page of resources. So go to Project CBD, see what they say about it. Go to these published, and we have thousands and thousands of published studies. Go read just one, and you'll start to see about insomnia, anxiety, how the pain relief, the inflammation that can be affected, how it can help with diabetes or Crohn's or Parkinson's or cancer. I mean, all these, their stories are out there. And it's my biggest frustration too. And when I was trying to get a bank to even support me, or to get a credit card system in place, it took 9 months. And for the credit cards, it took 3 months for the bank, and they scrub your website. I mean, and so I had to go through, and even the things that I had on there that were associated with Ayurveda could be misconstrued as saying, I mean, I know for a fact that turmeric helps with inflammation, and I can put that on my website, but if it's inferred that I mean anything with cannabis, then it can't, and it's just so stupid. So I'm still learning myself, but what I did do is I put a whole page on my site, and like, here's where you can learn more. And I just try to talk around it the best I can. And I'm sure somebody could probably read through my site and find places that I haven't even realized that I shouldn't say things. So I'm still figuring that out.
What's your website?
ZVEDA, Z-VEDA, ZVEDA.com. And so the name ZVEDA comes from, late night session of trying to figure out what a great name would be. And Zana is an ancient Sanskrit word for cannabis, and Veda, which is from the word Ayurveda. Ayurveda means science of life. Ayur means life. Veda translates to wisdom of or science thereof. And so I had the idea that Zana Veda is the wisdom of cannabis, but to fit that on a label kind of was a little wordy. So ZVEDA is what came out of my elementary graphic design. So it's Z-Veda, because that was what was available for a URL.com. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate you coming, and feel free. I have a booth in the CBD marketplace in the very far back corner, booth number 32. So I'll be here tomorrow too. And I have we have bitters and tinctures and topical massage oils, salves, some teas and things like that. So there's a lot of wonderful products out there today. I think it's pretty impressive what we have here, and I think just stay with it and spread the word. And thanks for listening.